Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here in this nice quiet venue. And I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of the work we've been doing with learning strategy and thinking about how to set up a strategy that really gets results in your organization and that works, in a systematic way of doing that. And so, just really briefly, my background, I've been in the learning and technology space for a long, long time, since the Apple II computer came out. And actually I worked for a company that was a family business where they built one of the first adaptive learning programs for SAT preparation with 32K of RAM, not 32 megabytes, 32K of RAM, adaptive learning. So, and now things have gotten a little better since then, but it's amazing what you can do with what you have. So I've been involved in the process of learning for a long, long time doing consulting. Along the way, I decided to do my doctorate in cognitive science, mainly because I really realized after working in the field for a while that to really do this right, you need to understand how people develop expertise, and that's what I studied. The development of expertise and proficiency, and how to use technology to accelerate that process. And so that's a big part of what's been my life's work. So I'm going to share with you it's kind of the big picture approach of how this can work and how some tools that you can use for this learning strategy. So first of all, I love this quote. I'm lived in Chicago 30 years, but I'm from New York, and I remember when Yogi Berra was with the Mets back then. But he's so profound, right? If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So the key thing is to know where you're going, and then have a map for getting there, and that's what I'm going to help share with you. And I'm going to do it in a kind of an interesting way. Rather than just show you the strategy method and a template that I'll show you, I'm going to use a case study. It happens to be a client that we worked with for many, many years, since it's been, let's see, about 8 or 10 years, and we're still working with them, that we did this whole process. And so I'm going to share with you the end result of that process first, okay? And then we're going to go back and see what we did from the strategy perspective to get to that point, okay? And actually, out of that process, you'll see this something that's called the Trek Learning Experience Manager, which actually became a product. It was a tool we built for this client to enable the type of learning, the on-the-job learning that they really needed. So it's kind of the story of development of Trek, which is a product, and now since my company and Trek has become part of eLearning Brothers, we actually have a booth over there at 829 if you ever want to come over and see me and talk more afterwards. Okay? So let's go. So the case study is with the Water Quality Association. They are an association whose member companies manage and track, they basically install and service water softening equipment, water purification equipment, okay? And so they have installers, they have salespeople, they have service techs, that type of thing. And so Water Quality Associations helps them get their people up to speed and provides that service. But here's the thing. What they had was a stack of books, basically, and information, and they had a written certification exam, and people would, try to get through these books and then take the exam and often not do well, but even if they did, the question is, how meaningful was that? Just because you can take a multiple choice exam, does that mean you can install a water softening system or troubleshoot a problem well, or, right, is that possible? I don't know, and they realized that it wasn't working so well. The other factor was their industry, there's kind of a turf battle in that industry. It's kind of interesting. Because plumbers can install this type of stuff, but they're not experts in water quality and on the details and nuances of it. And so they've been used to be more fly by night, the people who dig your wells and stuff like that, and they're trying over the past few years to really establish themselves as a legitimate professional profession and industry and get states to regulate. So they needed to change the way they're doing things and get people really up to speed, to be really professional and to live up to that promise. That was the challenge. So what I'm going to share with you is kind of the strategy process. And this is a tool, and by the way, if you give me a card afterwards, I'm happy to share with you this stuff and the tool. It's a template that I put together that kind of summarizes how the process for developing an effective strategy and all the key components of it. There's a lot here. I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to use examples from this case to show you how it works. So you don't have to take it in all. I'm going to go through piece by piece. Okay? So, first I'm going to show you a little bit about what the outcome was, right? Then we're going to go back. You know, when my family growing up, they were always late for everything. And so when we would go to a movie, right, we would get to the movie usually late, well into when the movie started already. And so, to enjoy it, what we would do is we'd watch the movie and then say, oh, I wonder, okay, now the mystery is, how did we get to the point where we are in the movie? And then we would stay, because those days you could stay in and they would cycle the next movie again and stay the next round and see the beginning to see if we were guessed right. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to show you the end, what happened, and then we're going to go back and see how we got there. So I learned that from my family. So this is the curriculum that we ended up developing for them and with them, Water Quality Association. So basically, there were the foundational water quality fundamentals and basics, and then a core curriculum for salespeople, for people who design water systems, for installers, and for service techs, and then advanced masters. So there's a whole gamut of the curriculum that involved really on-the-job learning and showing that they can actually do the tasks so that they can be validated. So what we did is we built software that is now this product, but we built it for them because we said, okay, if you're going to really learn skills, as we know from how people develop expertise in the 70-20-10 idea, is that people develop skills not just by taking formal courses, not by reading stuff, but by actually doing and getting feedback and coaching on the job. But there's no software to manage and track that stuff, that manages learning experiences. Now, by the way, you'll hear around here this whole concept of, how many have heard in this conference the idea of a learning experience platform? Learning experience platforms, that's kind of become a hot term. Okay, but beware, because learning experience platforms, the tools, if you look at those tools, that they're very good, but what they really are is content curation provision platforms as opposed to experience platforms. What Trek is made for is to actually, we call it a learning experience manager. It manages and tracks learning paths that include the formal, informal, and experiential on-the-job learning process, and also provides what we call a nano-coaching feedback cycle. This all came out of this project, though, that's now this product, but and we're basically give short, tiny coaching interactions. Because if you're going to learn by doing, getting that feedback is a critical part of that learning process and reflecting on that. And then it provides a way to have analytics as to what's going on out there in the world. Okay, so for example, that's at 70-20-10. So the LMS handles that 10%, the formal training, but the on-the-job experience, the informal, and the formal is what Trek handles. Okay, but we built it. I didn't build it because I wanted to build software. I built it because I needed to do this for our client, okay, based on the strategy we developed, and there was no software to do it. So we built it. And now you all could have it too. Okay, let me show you an example of how it works, of what we did for them. Again, and then I'll show you the strategy to get to this point. So this is screenshots from my mobile Android. And so let's say Joel Waterman, he signs in, and on his mobile device, he has what's assigned to him. And he gets water quality basics, fundamentals, and then water treatment for sales representatives, because he's going to focus on being a sales representative, okay? So if he touches the, let's say, fundamentals on his computer, it expands out, and it's made up of these badges that include water treatment, hydraulics, ethics, etc. So each of those badges are authenticated, and you get a badge. Here's a big thing. I don't believe in getting a badge for taking a course or reading a book or watching a video. I think people should get badges for showing they can do something. That's when they're meaningful. Because who cares? I'm going to come to your house and install this thing. I read the book on it, or I'm a pilot and I've read and done a multiple choice test. Would you like to fly in my airplane with me? Well, no. Okay, so think about that kind of thing. So, and each of these badges is made up of learning activities. So, for example, water treatment is made up of a variety of types. So, these icons here are little short storyline courses, micro-learning storyline courses. But then there's on-the-job, these multiple-step on-the-job things. So, for example, you might, in your path, take a course on softener capacity, right? Calculating softener capacity. But then you actually have to do it on the job. Okay, so that you don't get the whole badge until you actually show you can apply what you've done on the job. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to one that he hasn't done. He had completed that one, and now he's going to go and do his certificate for sales representative. He's already done the self-assessment. He's going to do, let's say he's going to go do perform a water test as one of his tasks, okay? So here's another key thing. The idea is to get the content that you need at the teachable moment, not 3 months before, but okay, I'm about to do this water test. How do I do that? Let me look it up. So I can go look it up in a knowledge base, okay? Whoops, where we took all the stuff in their books and put it into this knowledge base that has all their information updated and flexible and accessible on their mobile devices. But Trek in the learning path links to it right at that moment they need it, at that teachable moment. Okay, and now, okay, oh good, I see how to do it. And now I'm gonna, I get my instructions as to what to do on the job, collect the sample, conduct the test, record the results, et cetera. And then, if I want to, if I'm not, still not sure how to do it, I can get a quick video on how to do it. This is a YouTube video. Again, on-demand content at the teachable moment. And this video, this is YouTube, but it could be a proprietary video. And Trek links to whatever internal systems you have to provide the content you want. Okay, and you want to provide the real content that's relevant that they're going to use outside of the learning as well, so they get used to using it. All right, now he's going to actually record, and there's an authoring tool within Trek that lets people put it, an instructional designer put in whatever they want. So say, okay, what did you get it, what was your result? Hardness of 9 ppm. What treatment do you recommend? Install a water softener. And then it uses the sensors of the mobile device, right, that captures what you've really done. So for example, I'm going to check in with the GPS that says I was here. Okay, so here I'm, Pacific Highway, here's where I was. Or you can upload a file of a document for review, or an audio or a photo, and that gets submitted to your coach for feedback. So in this case, it's a visual test, so I'm going to do a photo, and they take a picture of it, and it's pink, whatever that means, okay? And now, but that gets submitted to the coach, okay, who then is going to give feedback on that, okay, there it is, and they give performance support to the coach. So now anybody can be a really good coach, because now they have all that they need in order to give good feedback. And the coach can be anywhere. They get a notification that says you got some feedback to give. Okay, and then let's say they complete it, the coach says you got it, then they get the badge. And the badge is authenticated. If you click on it, you'll see the evidence of what they've done to do that. Okay, I'm just showing you this, not because yes, I'm proud of it, but mainly because I want to show you kind of an example of the end product. Now let's go back and look at how we got to this point. Okay, back in time. We'll go see the beginning of the movie now. And by the way, we got results like this from them, and this is what you want to hear when you do this internally or externally. They loved it and it worked really well. But there was a process to getting to this point, and that's what I'm going to share with you. So this is this template, and I find it to be a very useful tool, and I'm beginning to start sharing it with people. So basically, the way it works is this. By the way, have any of you heard of the business model canvas? Something like that? Yeah, for business modeling. It's kind of, the idea of doing it came from that, although I don't really like the structure of it. It's not really organized as well as I'd like, and this is kind of a way that helps me think about the whole process in a systematic way of developing a strategy. And basically, we focus on a few things. One is the results on top there. What are the results we need? What is the performance we need in order to get those results? And how are we going to enable that? How are we going to support that? That's the top, right? And then down the left is who's going to be the leaders involved in that? What kind of guidance is going to be given to guide what you're going to do, to guide the actions that people are going to take to do it? What kind of support is going to be provided to those actions? Okay, and what's the context, and and also what are the disciplines you need to know in order to be able to design these really well? That's kind of what the pieces are. So I'm going to kind of go through these blocks and show you examples of what happened within this case study during those. So for the results, so for example, if you look at results, who are the people involved with results? It's the leaders or the executives and stakeholders, right? You got to start with what do the people who are the executives of this organization, what do they care about in this organization? What do they need and what do they see as important? Because that's what you always have to be focused on. It's obvious, but we don't necessarily do it and make sure we get that enough. Okay, so, and then there's going to be, each of these things, there's going to be the value to the organization, the outcomes, the back here, what are the outcomes, that's the action, and what kind of analytics are you going to use to kind of measure that you've actually met those outcomes, right? And then the performance, the leaders of that are the experts and master practitioners. There's the people who say, here's how it should be done, here's what good looks like. okay? And then out of that comes competence and proficiencies, what people should be able to do, and specific, not just competencies, but specific proficiency statements that say, here's specifically what they need to do, because that's going to guide the employee. And the employee is in the red in the middle because the employee is the center of it all. The employee is the one who does the performance and does the actions that are going to lead to those results, okay, those outcomes. And then the manager and the coach or peers support, their role is to support the employee in doing that, and that's that support role. And then finally, there's the enablement. So the people, the leaders of enablement is you, us, right? It's the learning and development people who are going to support that process and develop the learning paths. And the guidance is the learning path that says, here's the steps I need to take to get to those proficiencies, right? And then the learning experiences are the actual experiences they have on the job, formal, informal. And then the content is what supports, right? That's the support role there. It supports those experiences. Content does the supporting of that. And then you have to take into account the organizational context, technology ecosystem within your work, what you're working in, make sure you have the right ecosystem, and the cultural context. Okay, what is the culture of learning in that organization or not? And underlying all that are these key disciplines. Design thinking, a process, and we'll go into that, but design thinking is a way to kind of think about this whole thing and organize the way you do it. It needs to be based on how people really learn, cognitive science and learning science, okay? And finally, we have a process that we call learning experience design. So yesterday I did a workshop on how to become a learning experience designer, which is a way of designing the entire learning process, the 70-20-10 process. And I do a lot of workshops on that type of thing. And by the way, tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to be doing a talk on cognitive science principles for learning too. So if you're interested in that, feel free to stop by. Okay, now what does this mean for Water Quality Association? How did we apply it? So let's take a look at each of these things. So the executives, who are they? They were the board of directors of the association, the executive director. These are people, we had to talk with those people, get their input, and we did. We met with them and talked with them. And then there's all the member companies and their owners and executives and talk with the representative sample of them. What's important to them? What do they care about? You have to have that to be able to get in there. And then, and also the education director for the association, who is kind of our direct client in the learning development area, right? What's the value to the organization? What did they want? They wanted their organizations to have more professionalism, to be more have credibility with state regulators. As a matter of fact, for example, we found out recently that the state of Colorado, for example, now accepted this learning path and the curriculum of Water Quality Association that we built as their standard, their state standard for what people need to do. So it's getting accepted by states and things like that. So more and more, that's the idea of what's happening. What are the skills that people need, and how are you going to get the value in terms of adoption from the WQA's adoption and their member companies adopting this program and they actually resell it, so they actually make money on it too, so their return on investment. Okay, and so then what are those outcomes that lead to those values? Increased market share, recognition by the states, for example, employee, they pass the certification exams and they do well, and a growing membership. And then what are the metrics? How do we measure those things? So you work down that list. Okay, how are we going to actually measure that this happened? For example, one measure is speed to proficiency. Can you reduce the time it gets for people to get up to speed, okay, on what they're doing? How many states are recognizing in their case? So you got to find the right metrics for your organization. I'd like to talk about speed to proficiency, because that's a great metric that a lot of people are not using that can be very, very valuable. You look at a baseline, how long does it take for a salesperson to get up to quota? Okay? Or how long does it take to get for a technician to be able to do stuff up to a level of proficiency where they're not going to make errors all the time and the first time fix rate is high enough, for example. Well, if you can set up a systematic learning path that's focused in a very systematic way that involves on-the-job learning and those learning science principles, you can increase the speed to proficiency significantly and the level of proficiency. We've had experience where we can increase it by 30% or more by setting up the systematic process of learning on the job. And then, okay, what does that mean? Well, that difference, imagine if a salesperson gets up to the $1 million quota 30% faster. That's a lot of money for the organization. Multiply that by 100 or 1,000 salespeople. Or the error rate goes down and customer satisfaction goes up much more quickly, and people are productive and they stay because they're more productive and they feel more confident, and so the turnover is reduced. So that's a key metric I recommend thinking about that, because it's not that hard to find out the baseline, although you need to know what proficiency is. And how do you find out what proficiency is? You find the people who know how to do it best, the models. So that's the next step. I say, give me your best people. Who are your master practitioners? And we go and we actually, get out from them, and we have a process for looking at, okay, getting their, what we call knowledge harvesting, getting at what their experiences are, how they do it, what they do at a deep level. And we use methods that get at their implicit knowledge as well. So, for example, these are guys from Water Quality Association. They're some experts from the different member companies, and we came and worked through all these things and helped them organize their knowledge and what they know and how to set things up. And we had a whole process for getting at their knowledge organization and the process they use. And that became, and most importantly, the experiences that they handle. Because what we do is we say, tell me all the experiences you can handle, all the situations you handle. And then they say, well, that's ridiculous. There's so many different possible experiences. It's an infinite number. I said, just write them down on cards and organize them. Whatever way makes sense to you. And it turns out there's a finite number of types of situations that then can vary by parameters. And so you can actually start categorizing and using that to help develop your learning paths, because those are the experiences you need. It's because it takes a long time to become an expert. They say 10 years. It's not about time. It's about experience. So how do you shorten the time to become an expert or proficient? Make sure people get those experiences in a very systematic way, instead of it taking years and years to get the right experiences by doing that, by setting up those learning paths. So the idea is, to be like that proficient expert practitioner, to get that out, their expert knowledge, and how do they organize it? That's the target. I want to be like Michael Jordan. Remember that? Taxonomy, and we create what's called a taxonomy of cases, which is basically those cards. We say, here's the different kinds of situations. Here's the parameters. Let's organize them by simple to complex, organize them in a way, and that becomes the map for creating the learning experiences in a very systematic way that's going to get people proficient. Okay? So those cases, the common and the common, the simple to complex, and then they also provide the raw material. So we got their books, but it's those cases that really provide the real life thing, getting people actively involved in doing things, to build those experiences and the scenarios and the stories and create that learning path. Okay? All right, so now out of that comes, that process comes, what are the competencies and proficiencies? Everybody, how many of you have competency maps for your organizations, for jobs in your organizations? Yeah, and they're good, but usually they're too high level to be useful, actionable, right? And so what we recommend doing is breaking them down into what we call proficiency statements, and I like to call it competence. What's your competence in this area, and your level of competence, and then what are the specific proficiencies that you have? So for example, for them, the one that I showed you with Trek, this is an example of what we came up with. So in diagnosing the water, for that badge, one of the competence levels is diagnosing water problems, and then these are the proficiencies. How do you can they greet the customer? It's can you do this? Right? What level can you do this? Can you explain the service call, assess visual clues, all these things? Can you read a water test? Those are things, and those guide us. Those are the guidance, provide the guidance for what learning activities we need and what's in the learning path. So it's very, very focused on only the things they need, not the stuff that's nice to know, the stuff they need in order to do the job well. So a systematic process enables doing that, right? And then the core of it is the employee. Because you got to make sure, you can do all this great design and executives, but it's the employee who's going to do it. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's why the employee is in the center and red, that's where it all happens, okay? So you got to really understand the employee, and this is where some of the ideas of design thinking come in. What we did with them was we had focus groups with these are member companies with a representative sample. Doesn't have to be a lot. It's the question is, what's the minimum number of people you need to talk to get the kind of variety and the differences that make a difference, right? And who they are in terms of experience, in terms of things like that. And then we use a process that comes out of design thinking, actually, and this idea of really being able to empathize, empathize with the client, what's the goals and desires of these people, and really get at what they are. Because if you don't get at that stuff, they're not going to do the great thing that you developed. They may not just do it, or they're not going to be engaged in it. Especially in this case where they don't have to do it. These member companies don't have to sign up. They don't have to be part of this. It's all voluntary. Where are they? Okay, you don't want to. What's their previous level of experience to get at where they're going? What are their motivations, both intrinsic and extrinsic? Those are important. Okay, so you got to know that, and that helps your design. and what are they thinking and feeling. Those are all pieces, and this comes from the design thinking process or user experience design process, where you really get at that persona and empathize with the learner. Get in their shoes. Go out there. The ride-along was valuable to me, because everything's abstract, but you then go and spend a day working with them on the field, see what they do, see the problems they encounter. It gives like a picture in your head. So even when you're dealing with abstract stuff later on, now it has meaning for me. I know exactly what they're talking about, that kind of thing. Really, really important. We know this, but again, often we don't have time to do it, but it's critical. All right, so that's the employee, and then the support for the employee is the manager or the coach. And of course they have a lot of roles, but think of it from a learning perspective, that's part of what you want the manager to do, is be coaching, or it could be another coach potentially, whoever it is, and even peers, social support, because that supports people in doing things, because learning is in a social context, okay? So for example, with Trek, what you saw there is what we call this nano-coaching feedback cycle. So Trek, the idea is to make it easy for the coach to do this. So for example, what you do is you do a task, right? You install a device, you capture it and you share the evidence, take a picture of it, do a checklist, whatever, okay? And then that is automatically routed to the coach who can give you feedback. So the coach gets a notification saying, you got some feedback to give. They can be in another state, they can be around the world. And you can have multiple coaches depending on what you're doing, okay? And then you reflect. Now reflection, once you get the feedback, right, the coach sends it back in different forms, and once you get the feedback, that reflection process is a core part of learning. Because when you're learning by doing, it's reflection on something that lets you abstract from those experiences the key principles, the key learnings. What am I going to do differently next time? And we all do it naturally, but usually it's training, and we don't support that well enough. The idea is to have targeted reflection on exactly what did I do and what can I do differently, and then try it again, because guess what? Any complex task, okay, and which is most real tasks these days that we're training on, you don't learn it by doing it once. You got to kind of go and try it again and do it multiple times, right, through practice. So you want to set up a process for doing that, and you only, once the coach says you got it, right, then that green arrow that says, okay, you got it, you can move on, you get the badge. So you can set it up so that it's performance focused. You get it to move on and you get the badge because you showed that you can do it, and the coach says, yep, you got it, based on a set of criteria, okay? So the managers, and what's interesting with the World Quality Association, this happens a lot in organizations, because at first, when you hear the word coaching, it's like, oh no, we have, how many of you have had leaders coach initiatives in your organizations? Raise your hand. Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you, for how many of you has it actually worked well? No hands are up, okay? And the thing is that this general coaching type of thing, coaches, managers, they get the training, formal training usually on it, without on the job, and then maybe they don't know how to use it well, and then once in a while they go say, oh, how things go, and they talk about stuff and they forget about it. But this nano coaching allows them to have very targeted, focused little feedback sessions online, and then later when they meet, they have real concrete stuff to talk about. It makes it easy, and there's a workflow for the coaches to make it easy for the managers to do it. And so at first they're very skeptical about it. But here's a quote from a focus group that we did when we did a pilot with this with the managers. This is a manager saying, he was skeptical, very skeptical. I love the ability to communicate back and forth with my employees. I love being proactively prompted that something is ready for me to review. This system gives me a reason to talk with my people about customers and issues so that I can tell if they understand what they're learning. I like it so much, I want to coach more people. You want to hear that kind of thing, right? You make it easy, and that's the kind of thing they had. And they start out skeptical, and this is where they end up. Okay. Lastly, an enablement column, right? We, the learning and development professionals, are the people who are going to enable this process and facilitate this process and build the learning paths and work with the SMEs. So, you need people who are able to do that, learning experience designers, learning managers, technical people who are going to develop like the e-learning courses or whatever other pieces are. We have a very important role in this, okay, as leaders in this process. And then we develop, based on those proficiencies, right, the guidance of the proficiencies, we develop a learning path, okay? And the learning path, here's an example where that learning path, in a sense, you can think of a learning path as a series of these cycles, right? Because that's how people learn. This is the natural cycle of way people learn. We learn, whether it's a kid or an animal or an amoeba, whatever, we learn by doing, by acting, getting feedback from that, what we do, and then making adjustments and trying again. That's how we learn. So think of that learning path as a series of these cycles, okay, of learning. And so you can organize that in a systematic way based on the experiences, the situations you got from the expert, okay, and then provide that content at the teachable moment. So right before they're going to do a certain thing, give them that content. And Trek is not a content repository in itself. It links to the customer's own content. That knowledge base I showed you is not part of Trek. We built it for them because they didn't have their own knowledge base. But we can connect into your own knowledge base, into SharePoint, into LMS, whatever you need, we connect into other systems to get the real world content that they're going to use. And then all of this is tracked using the Experience API. Trek was actually one of the very first applications that use Experience API, which, how many people know what that is? We're here, a few. Basically what it is, I'm not going to go into it, there's a lot of sessions on it, and you should learn about it, but basically it's a activity stream for learning activities, all types of learning activities. SCORM is great for making sure one e-learning course can work in multiple LMSs, right? That's what SCORM is about. XAPI tracks all kinds of learning activities, experiential, and it's basically like a Facebook activity stream. Okay, basically, John posted this photo, but instead, Jane liked this photo. Now it's going to be, with XAPI, you can say, John installed this device. Jack looked at this video. Frank did well on its observation checklist. So you can do that simple things and track that and then use that for analytics and reporting. All right? And then that learning path is made up of the learning experiences. And so then you got to develop the learning experiences. This is part of the learning experience design process. Okay? And so an example with Trek, kind of a way that it works, is so you might do that competency assessment. You have a learning path that leads to the competence and proficiencies. And the learning experiences could be formal learning experiences. Okay? That could be a workshop or an e-learning course. That's part of it. But also those informal ones, not, looking stuff up in a knowledge base, a short video, social interaction, asking someone. And then there's the experiential, which is that 70%, right? It's like that real world activities, doing the real thing. And all of that is tracked and managed in a systematic way. You got to develop each of those types of things. So for the experiential, you just basically, it's instructions. Here's what to do in the job. And then here's the way you're going to assess that. And here's the content that you're going to get at that moment. Right? And then all of that is tracked using Experience API. The mobile device, Trek is responsive. It works on desktop or on mobile. Okay? And but the point of it is that you can then you can track the real world things with the sensors of that mobile device. Okay? And then set up that nano coaching feedback cycle. Right, as we talked about, and all of that is tracked in the Learning Record Store with XAPI. That allows that tracking and analytics, the awarding of badges that are meaningful because it's based on actual what you can actually do. Okay, you can tie that then into organizational corporate metrics. So WQA, just recently now, they've built a data warehouse. So they take the information from Trek and take other data from the association management system and other stuff and put that in, and they can do correlations. So you can start tying this stuff to real world metrics. Okay, and then based on that, you can say, okay, where I am, and we'll start to build in this next phase, which is the adaptive phase. What do we do next given where we are? All right, so and then finally there's the content of this part of it. Okay, content is important, right? How many of you heard this expression, content is king? Right? Okay, yes, content is king. But if content is king, experience is the emperor. In other words, learning is all about experience, and content kind of comes in. Content is easy to get. You can get it anywhere. You can get it from most of these systems here. You can get it from Google. Hello. Yesterday in my presentation, I made the mistake of saying, "Okay, Google," and my phone popped up, wanting some answers. So I'm not telling the phone now. But you can get that information so easily. Okay, but what do you do with it? That's where expertise comes in. It's like, how do I use it? How do I find what I need? How do I use it? Yeah, you can memorize stuff, but you use it anyway. You remember the important stuff by doing it and using it anyway. So experience is the key, okay? So that's why we don't focus on that and provide the content as needed. And their content was in books, as I mentioned. I mean, they had a stack of books. Oh my God, they were just these technical things. I had them in my office for a long, long time. And I mean, literally this tall. And what we did is we took all the content from their books, and some of it was not even available electronically anymore, scanned it in, updated it, and put it in that knowledge base that I showed you, right? That basically, on the left side here, they have everything they want, they can search, they can find it, separate from Trek. And then Trek links to it, though, at that teachable moment, right? So Okay, so those are the kind of key things. Now, underlying all that is the organizational context, because you got to do all that within what's the culture, what's the organization, how does your organization fit with this, and how is it going to support this process or not, and what are the issues related to that? You have to take that into account into a strategy. What is the technology ecosystem that is going to, support this process? And usually no one technology does it all. Okay, and you got to put together, and you have an existing ecosystem, and you have to move towards putting together the right technologies. The XAPI is a great way because it allows sharing of data across different technologies, put them together into a coherent ecosystem. And one of the things that we do is do learning ecosystem workshops to help organizations think about how do you design a learning ecosystem based on what you have to move to the next level for that. Actually, my colleague, I don't know if he's here right now, we're going to Bangkok on Thursday to do that with an organization there. We've done a learning ecosystem kind of workshop and then strategy sessions, and now we're going to help them implement that next. So that's the kind of thing that we do a lot as well. Oops, and then there's the cultural aspect of things. By the way, on the ecosystem, here's an example of, so what WQA's ecosystem, so it had TREC, we tie it into their other systems for single sign-on, make it easy for single sign-on. They use Articulate for Storyline for the micro-learning to 10%. The information, the XAPI information was stored in a learning record store called Veracity. Really nice, good learning record store that we recommend and we've been working with. There are a lot of others though here too, Watershed and Ben Bett's one, which Learning Locker and others as well. And then we tie into their association management system, Microsoft Dynamics, so that all the user information and the sign-ups all go through their system and then tie in. So it's like tying into all the systems. That's how you got to play nicely with others. You got to work together, right? And then they have that data warehouse that lets them do the analytics on that. So that's kind of an example, a simple one. It could be more complex, but an example of how all the pieces fit together. But you have to think about that. How is it going to fit into what you're doing, fit into that learning, that technology ecosystem? Right? And then how are you going to get those badges? And you can, for example, share those badges with Mozilla Open Badges or other ways as well, and they are authenticated. Then there's the cultural aspect of things, right? You got to know, what's the culture of your organization? What's the culture of the member organizations? What, in terms of learning, what's the perspective on learning? What's the perspective on that type of thing? And obviously we have certain level of power to change that, but not a lot necessarily, but we got to know what it is and try to influence it to kind of move in the direction that we need. But you got to take into account. If you're a startup that has like, we don't have time for this, or you're a small company, then that may affect how you do your learning and your training because it may not work for them the way that you would want it for another organization where they want to really invest in that learning in a different way. So that's really important to take into account. And then finally, the final thing is there's underlying disciplines, because all of this stuff is the process, but what are the things that we do, how do we enable this process? And these kind of infuse all of them. And one is design thinking, okay? How many of you are familiar to some degree with design thinking? Yeah, you got to learn about it. We do workshops on that too, but basically it's a whole process of really solving problems that involve basically empathizing like we did, right? Getting to know who your audience is really well. This is user experience design. We have our great user experience designers right there. Nick, for example, who's understands that you got to understand that user, and then you define the problem really well. If you can define that problem really well, the solution is inherent in that definition. So what's really going on? And that's that strategy component we're talking about. And then come up with creative ideas. How to ideate, but then pick one and test it. Because you're not going to come up with the perfect solution right away. And there are a lot of iterations that we had in doing this and to get to this point. Okay, it's iterative process, and that's the key thing. It's successive approximation, and that's what's happening. That's how software is built these days. That's the agile approach is also kind of tied in with this. And we start moving in that direction. That's how we think about it and test stuff and try again. Okay, and evolve it over time. Yes, it takes a little more time. You got to build that in, but then you actually get something that works. Because you can do it quick and dirty, and that's it. But then you probably won't get the results. So do you want the results or do you want a low investment? That's kind of the, part of the question. So, and then there's also learning science, which is that cognitive science and understanding how people learn, because you got to build this stuff the way that people learn. And again, tomorrow afternoon, I'm not going to talk about it now, but I'm doing a whole session on that tomorrow afternoon. I don't remember exactly, I think 3 or 4 or something like that, but look up my name, you'll see it. It'll be fun. And then, so the cognitive science is a key component of that. Not to be confused with neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience, another pet peeve of mine. It's about functionally how do we think and do and solve problems, and not necessarily the biological aspects of it, because really we don't really know how the biological affects that real stuff yet. We don't know enough to be actionable. But we do know from years of studying psychology and cognitive psychology what works and how people learn from a functional perspective. So anyway, that's a little thing I want to tell you about. And then learning experience design process. Again, a lot of people are moving from becoming an instructional designer to that learning experience designer, okay? And that's a key thing. So you're talking about that path to proficiency, 70, 20, 10, right? Formal, informal. So the instructional design process mostly focuses on those courses. Learning experience design focuses on the entire process. So how do you design those experiences? Okay. So that's all there is to it. It's easy. But this gives a nice systematic way to do stuff. A lot of this you may do and but this is a really nice template, I find, to kind of make sure that we're doing this in a very systematic, effective way. All right? And okay, here's the result. I'm not saying this to brag, although I am proud, and I had this on my refrigerator for quite a while. But I'm saying it because this is the kind of results you can get from your stakeholders. We picked the right vendor. You guys have been spectacular. That's true. But and by the way, modesty is one of the many things that makes me so great. But anyway, everyone I've worked with from our organization has been a pro. The way you guys approach this from a cognitive and organizational level blows my mind. This is, by the way, the president of the Water Quality Association said this. I hope you take pride in knowing that you helped in an industry that has a lot of great information get that thing on a much better plane. I can't tell you how excited and thrilled and thankful I am to be part of a project that's going to change the industry. So if you do this right, you can have a huge impact on your organization or your customer organization. That's the kind of thing you can do. And so that's what I have to say about it. I wanted to share that. If you give a card to me or one of the guys in orange back there, or sign up, I can send you information. Make sure you make a note saying you'd like this template and you'd like some more information. Give us a card. If you're interested in seeing Trek and what this evolved into, so 2 rows over, booth 829, we actually have a booth where I'll be there talking about Trek and stuff and learning strategy type stuff. So come by and take a look at that. I want to thank you very much for being here.
Marty, thank you very much. That was fantastic.